co-housing, not necessarily shared meals, but I love them. So many things, you don't need to go to nearly so many meetings, you just talk about it over supper and it's handled. So it's just a more natural way to bring that to people that has been delightful, saves time, and we get better meals than when we cook on our own. And carpooling, I didn't have a picture of carpooling, so I showed a picture of cartpooling. That was just an invention of one Windsonger. It doesn't happen too often, but carpooling has been really profound. Just one example again in our family is, if we were living in a single family home now, my wife and I would need 2 cars, but we manage with 1 car. The reason why we can do that is because the times when we do have a conflict for the car, if we have a car we can borrow. Carpooling kids to school has been very helpful just to reduce the load of car, and there's so many others. Workshop, there's so many different ways that sharing has reduced our costs as well as our footprint. And caring and mutual support unfold us from cradle to grave. So this, again, these two are not related. If you often sometimes think this a gruff old guy, but you see him with the young kids, and it just warms your heart to see. And from cradle to grave, I'll just point out, this is our memorial fountain. Now, isn't that interesting? If you live there for 18 years, there's going to be people that pass away. That's the thing. If you live in community, there's going to be more births, there's going to be more deaths, there's going to be more birthday parties, all of those, all of life together. So, on one lady suffering from cancer, her family donated this memorial fountain. And so we've established a tradition of keeping names of everybody who's passed away in the memorial fountain. And one family, most of those people do not have a grave marker anywhere else. It's only there. Some families come from outside Windsonger on a birthday to honor a loved one. Right in the heart of the community. Mural painting cooperation by kids. We planted trees. We have this lowland part of our site where we can't build there. All families involved in planting and stewardship of the lowlands. A terrific silent night celebration happens regularly. And I'll just touch on this briefly because I'm running out of time. I'm talking about seniors co-housing is an up-and-coming thing, and that's just a choice. Some people want generational, some people want seniors. It's just per choice. And we're seeing more interest in people with developmental disabilities coming into co-housing, which is, I'm encouraging, I think is wonderful. Various benefits there. And co-housing has many, many tangible benefits, but I just want to give you the intangible benefits by summing it up like this, if I may. And it's a quote from the Velveteen Rabbit. "Real isn't how you're made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time. It's not just to play with, but really loves you. Then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, who's always truthful. "When real, you don't mind being hurt. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair has been lugged off, your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." So co-housing, really, in my view, is simply people becoming more real together. Thanks, Howard. Always good to hear him speak. Our next speaker is a facilitator with Source Facilitation. He specializes in working with the underlying patterns of what makes for a healthy group dynamics. Today he'll be exploring with us what makes co-housing work through a lens of group dynamics. Please help me welcome Daniel Lindenberg.
I'll take a moment because Howard's making me tear up. Howard, in addition to being a great speaker, is also my next door neighbor. And when we moved into Windsong, it was Howard who, at our first potluck, lent us his stove so that we could get stuff made so we could go. My talk today is going to be, it's called Why Cohousing Works, and it's a perfect place to pick up after where Howard left off, because those intangibles, the group dynamics, is what I'm going to be focusing on. A pattern language analysis sounds kind of complicated and academic, but really what it means, we'll talk a little bit more about it in a sec, is it's looking at what are the things that make groups work well together. So we're going to explore cohousing through that lens. So this is Winsong. Howard has already told us a good amount about it, so I won't say too much, except that my wife and I moved in 6 years ago. We're raising our family there. And as Howard has pointed out, it's a marvelous place to raise kids. If you want to hear more about that or talk about that, we'll be talking about that a little bit at our table afterwards. Another thing to know about me is that I'm part of Source Facilitation. So we're a facilitation group that works primarily, but not exclusively, with communities. We've worked with groups from the sitting around the dining room table, figuring out what it is that they want to be doing stage, through the breaking ground stage, and have worked with some of the communities that have been around for a decade or so. Also to note, with Source Facilitation, it stemmed from cohousing. All of us met through different cohousing engagements. We're involved in we live in three different cohousing projects. And cohousing is very collaboration and entrepreneur friendly. Again, we can talk a little bit more about that at the table if that's interesting to folks. The final piece about me is that Group Works is something I'm involved with. I'm on the board for a nonprofit called the Group Pattern Language Project, and for 3 years, 50 facilitators got together to try to figure out and discern and name when groups are really working well, when they're alive and they're functional and they're life-affirming, what is it that's working within those groups? And the end product of that was a card deck of 91 cards. Each card names one element of what makes that work. It's used for all kinds of different things, but one of those things is called organizational mapping or method mapping. And we use that to look at a given organization or type of organization and pull out what are the few key patterns that are really unique and bring life to that group. What are some of the things that that group is best at using in a constructive way? So we're going to be doing that in a sec. There's going to be cards on the screen. You don't have to read everything that's there. Look at the title, get a picture, and you'll get a little bit of the gist of what it is that we're talking about. If you want to explore them in depth, we can do that at the table as well. So we're going to look at 4 different slices of co-housing life. The formation process, the actual architecture and the design and layout, the governance, the decision-making and the policies, and the community life. So we'll start with formation. And as Howard mentioned from their process that they have, challenge is one of the key initial patterns that's there. Often you'll have one or a small number of burning souls, I've heard the term used, for people who are just passionate. They have an idea for what they want in terms of community. They're looking for and want to create an alternative to the isolation that often comes from the individualism that's standard urban life. And there's a lot of challenges in making that a reality. You need at times the endurance of a marathon runner to go through that multi-year process together. And at times you need that energy of a fast sprinter when you'll have a burst of all of a sudden a lot of high stakes, fast decisions that need to get made that are going to shape your community. And you have these diverse stakeholders that are there, different people with different views and different ideas who have to come together, listen to one another, and all together come up with a decision that's going to work. And then sometimes have to revise that decision once things change, and revise it again perhaps. That process is hard, but from that challenge comes an incredible bond. We moved in many years after Winsong was created, and you can tell the people who have been there the longest, because there's this kinship and this ability when there are challenges to simply deal with them together as people, rather than panicking and looking for the policy. Policies are important too, but they recognize that personal connection, and that through just talking to one another, you can work out most of the details that are there. Another key element in the formation stage is whole system in the room. And what I mean by that is that you don't have, as Howard mentioned as well, you don't have a developer who is looking, what can I build for ideally the cheapest I can, that has the right bells and whistles that are going to attract people in, and once that's succeeded, mission accomplished, I'm done. Instead, what you have is a group that is directed by the people who are going to be living there. And so they have a high investment in making the right decisions for that group. Things like, let's have a little bit more soundproofing between our walls, between our houses, rather than having the flashy fountain that might be out in front that's spouting lots of water. Instead, let's have the memorial fountain. Let's have something that actually has meaning inside our community. So directed by that group, you then have the architect, you have the relationships with the city and the municipality that happen. And I can't stress enough that Howard also mentioned the groups that bring in a professional to help them figure out and navigate that path of making it happen are much more likely to succeed and figure that part out. So this whole system in the room piece is an important piece of the group dynamics that leads to functional co-housing. We'll talk for a second about the architecture. And one of the key pieces there is that it's purpose-driven design. And what I mean by that is that the usual process is that you have, again, the architect comes up with the plan in conjunction with the developer. People move in hoping, they think it looks nice, and they hope that the right kind of activities and right things are going on there, and they find a place that more or less meets their values. With purpose-driven design, what you have instead is those people saying, what's important to us? What do we value most? And what do we seek? From that, then saying, well, okay, so what are the activities that are going to embody that? How do we come together to make those priorities not just intellectual, but alive inside our lives? And from there, then the architecture steps. You say, okay, so if those are the things we want to be doing, what are the places that we need to create that are going to allow those kind of activities to happen? And from all of that happening, you get nooks in space and time. And what I mean by that is that you get these little places. There was that wonderful picture of Cam and Basanto's table, and they mentioned that this is a regular thing. People just gather there to have meals. Little tiny spaces where people can come, gather, connect in a way that is informal and spontaneous is vital. There's a lot of thought that goes into how you develop co-housing, and this is where those architects and professionals can help come up with things you wouldn't have thought of. Things like having your kitchens facing one another across the hall. And what that means is that when you're sitting there and you're washing your dishes in your house, you're able to see the people going by and say, oh wait, there goes Alan. I haven't seen Alan in a little while. Maybe I'll run out and see how he's doing. Or, oh yeah, there's Susan. There's something I was meaning to talk to her about. So it encourages those spontaneous interactions. I'll talk a little bit about governance and decisions. A key piece that Howard mentioned was consensus. Consensus is what's usually used in co-housing, though consent is sometimes used as well, which is especially in communities that are adopting sociocracy. But the bottom line is that rather than having a strata council that hands out a policy, you have a meeting that everybody in the community is welcomed to, and together you decide what those policies are going to be, you decide what projects are going to move forward, and you do it until everybody in the room agrees, yeah, that sounds like that's in the interests of the community. Not necessarily that everybody says that best serves my interests, but that everybody can say, yeah, I don't have any objections where I feel like this is going to lead us as a community on a wrong track. That sounds impossible. 34 in our house, in Winsong, 34 households coming together and agreeing to a point where every single person around us says, yeah, we can move forward with that. Just sounds alien, especially when we come from a a majority rules culture. Where the dynamic tends to be, as long as I have enough people backing me and I can shout the rest of you down loudly enough, I'm going to get my way. But when you actually have to have everybody in agreement, one of the challenges is you have to listen to one another and you have to actually understand what it is that's important to each other. This makes the process longer, but it makes for much, much better decisions in the end, and decisions that you don't have to go back and regret that you made once they've been done. On that note, embracing dissonance and difference is a key element of how we make our decisions. Rather than trying to, as quickly as possible, streamline to get something done, though at times you need to do that, we diverge and we explore the divergence. We don't look for, well, where's the majority and how do we get the rest on board? First, usually what we do is figure out what is the diversity that's in the room. What are the different opinions? What are the different ideas of how we could do things? And what are the values that inform those ideas? Again, this takes longer, but you get to know each other, you get to respect each other, you get to find out about each other, and you come up with better solutions, rather than this push-pull of, can I get enough people for option A, or will it end up being option B? You find option C, and oftentimes this option C, it's not about finding the compromise in between, it's working together till you come up with something brilliant that you never would have thought of if you hadn't been presented with that challenge of finding something that really does work for everybody. So embracing that dissonance and difference and leaning into it to find something that's creative and better is a core part of how we make our decisions in co-housing. And I would say it bleeds out into the rest of our lives as well. when you are continually challenged by that, it makes it a lot easier in your work, in your family, in other areas, to when you come up against differences or something that is alien to you, the reflex changes to one of, that's interesting, I'd like to find out about that, I'd like to understand it, and then how do we work with that? So it's a benefit that bleeds over. And what that leads to is a valuing of the margins. As a species, as a culture, this is something that, if we're going to survive, we have to get a lot better at. Because often what we do is we take the people with the most wisdom that we need to listen to, and we marginalize it. Those are the weirdos. In different sorts of camps of weirdo, thankfully we can isolate them so we don't have to worry about that. But instead, when you're really coming together and you're having these conversations and you have to all agree, those little bits of wisdom that otherwise you could ignore have to percolate in, and you have to listen to those. And so you benefit tremendously from that. What that leads to is a trust in the wisdom of the group. Whether you participate in those meetings or whether you don't, there's an incredible trust that builds up within that community that you're going to come to a solution, that it's going to be a right solution, and that there's a good faith assumption that if somebody is disagreeing with you, they're not being ornery, it's not because they dislike you, it's not because they're dumb, it's because there's something that you need to understand that they're bringing to the table. The table. I'll talk briefly about the community life. One of the things that Howard has mentioned as well that's key is breaking bread together. And I'll talk about that both literally and figuratively. Oftentimes when we have a interest-based group, whether it's our work or whether it's a group that gets together for a book club or whatever your passion might be, we get to know one facet of each other. We get to know the piece of us that is most relevant to that group. When we break bread together, which we do often at Winsong, you get to know the whole person. You get to find out what are the things that are going on in their lives in the moment, what do they think about just about everything, whatever's burbling up for them, rather than simply, well, what do you think about this specific thing that we need to make a decision about? Having that whole person in mind makes it a lot easier when there are challenges to in a love puddle in the middle of the common house. We each have our own lives, our own passions, our own things that we're doing. There's a lot of room for that individuality. But there's a tending of relationships and a nurturing of right relation with each other. Are there challenges that come up? Are there the fights and the squabbles and the drama that you'll find? Absolutely, those are absolutely there. I'd say no less so than anywhere else. The difference is in how we approach it. And there tends to be a commitment to working through when drama comes up and when there's an explosion that happens between people. There's an understanding that that's this moment, and that what's more important is that we work together and we understand and we reconnect afterwards. And there's a huge power in that again, I think as a species, the more we think back into that, the healthier we're going to be. And the last piece around the community life, although it informs all of it, is emergence. And what I mean by that is that you have your initial people who start things out, and it just stems from there. And as things evolve, they really evolve based on the character of the people who are there, their vision, their drive, their energy. So if you go and visit, which I would encourage you to do, the different co-housings that are out there. We're really fortunate in Vancouver to have, more than anywhere in Canada, a variety of different co-housings that you can hop on a bus, hop on a sea bus, and within half an hour you can be there, or 5 minutes from here you can be at one. So having that, you can see the differences that appear. Each one is totally different because it emerges from the people. There's nothing cookie cutter that can happen within co-housing. I'm going to invite you later on at our Q&A table to come and share some story around what community has been like when it's alive for you, and to think a bit about what would it be like to build something with people who are all sharing that vision of building something that works for them and that's important, the community is important for them. That's all. Thank you very much.